hit go on and share. All right, guys, welcome back. This is the Brand Ambassador, Celebrate the Brand Ambassador. This is episode 19. And I am here with the lovely Jenna Murray and Taylor Corrigan. So thank you guys, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me today. How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
I'm
very great.
well.
So very well. Poor Taylor. Taylor's been in his house forever, so Taylor's in Canada, everybody. He's up in Toronto, and they're still in lockdown, and Jenna is in Chicago. So I am, and we are lucky in Chicago and New York City that we are pretty much almost all completely, back to normal, which is very nice. Taylor's crossing his fingers that eventually they're going to get there. So at least you have a bright and sunny home to be in, so that's nice.
That's it. Until then, I've got lots of room, and I've gotten really, really great with virtual events. So, just an opportunity to brush up on new skills.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start. So my first question I always ask, and I'm going to start with you, Jenna, is what is your current position and what are your responsibilities?
Yep. So I am fortunate enough to be the whiskey brand ambassador for Pernod Ricard. And we cover everything from Scotch to Irish and now our American bourbons. And my division is the American division within our company. So 15 states all across the U.S. And I'm on the road. Well, used to be on the road a lot.
Well, hopefully you'll be there again. And Taylor, what is your position? And who do you work for?
Through various stages of lockdown, just made a transition within working for Brown-Forman here in Canada. Had been working in a national capacity, really focused on Woodford Reserve and also Old Forester, and since have shifted back onto the Jack Daniel's family of brands. So I'm back in black on Jack, and my new job title is Senior Advocacy and Engagement Manager. So shifted a little bit of my energy, but still so much of the storytelling and engaging with consumers and influencers and bartenders, and just being agile and using all those trending words right now. But still staying
pivoting,
connected.
Agile, transitioning.
Yes.
Woohoo!
Yes.
all the words. So I'm going to start off by talking about, it's funny, you guys are both in whiskey, but you both have had other roles before your current job, and you were both part-time brand ambassadors. So I want you to tell me a little bit about your responsibilities were and what the pluses and minuses were for being part-time, because this is a role a lot of bartenders get hired for. They want to get into this role, they want to try it out, but it's not always what it cracks up to be. So Jenna, why don't you start? Who were you part-time with, and the good parts about the job and the hardships of being part-time?
So when I was still bartending, I got a part-time gig with Pisco Portone. I think they might have changed the name since then, but
I think it's still Pisco Portone. Have they changed the name?
I don't know. Maybe, but
maybe the packaging
has changed a little bit.
I think the packaging.
Yeah, it was a great, like I said, like you said, being part-time is a great way to kind of transition into this world. You get to learn some new skills, kind of easier, get your feet a little wet in what it's like to be a brand ambassador. But definitely has its challenges. Like I walked in there basically blindfolded. I did not know anything about corporate jargon or, words, acronyms, nothing. So it's a little bit overwhelming. But I do think as a career bartender, it's a great way to also look at our world from a different perspective. And then also, maybe decide if completely walking away from the bar is right for you. I know so many people that have driven their car into that brand ambassador garage, and after 2 weeks immediately hit reverse and was like, I want out of here. So I think it's a good way to get your feet wet and see if it's something that is interesting, even though it has its challenges. But it's also fun to be able to visit all your friends' bars and experiment with products and cocktails and look for those cocktail menu placements with people that are your colleagues. So although it's challenging maybe to juggle part-time with still also working behind the bar yourself, I think it's a great way to see if this world is kind of like right for you.
True, but as you said about juggling the time, for you, like, you might get hired for 20 hours, but how many hours are you really working?
40.
A
Let's
lot.
be honest.
40. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And also at all times of the day. I mean, Taylor, maybe you could tell me this, but like you sometimes start at 9 and then you're not going,
Oh, we just lost Taylor.
We just lost
Oh,
him.
hopefully he comes back. All right. I'm assuming he'll be back on. Yeah.
You were bartending till, 3, 4 in the morning, and then I don't know. Starting off those daytime meetings really get you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I definitely saw, and hopefully Taylor, I know he had some technical difficulties before, is able to get back on, because one of the things that I saw was a problem. I was helping consulting for the Cocktail Guru. Was sometimes the clients had big expectations for what a part-time brand ambassador could be, and I'd be like, I think that's a little unrealistic. We can try, but I don't think they're not sales reps. And then two, bartenders sometimes had unrealistic expectations of what they could achieve. I'm like, okay, so you're working 6 days a week, you get off Sundays, and you're saying on Sundays the day that you're going to go out and be the brand ambassador, and they're like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. I'm like, no,
it's too much.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
It's
you
too
can't.
much.
It's not sustainable for your own
that time. No, it definitely is. But there was definitely some positive things. Didn't you like you were working with a small company and you got to learn a few things. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think working for a smaller brand gives you an opportunity to I don't really love this terminology that much, but you do get to kind of get a seat at the table in some maybe aspects that normally you wouldn't have the opportunity to do, like sit in with a distributor or supplier meeting where they're talking about incentives, or I think you have an opportunity to, especially with a small brand, see a lot of nuances that are part of the business that maybe from a bigger brand perspective you don't get to see.
No, you're right. I think working for a smaller company has great advantages if you take advantage of them. So sometimes, people never get to the corporate office because they're being hired and their main office is in, Boston, and they're living in Chicago. So they might not be in those meetings. And now via Zoom, you probably can be. But it is also a lot about asking to be part of this meeting. It's something I encourage a lot of brand ambassadors, and I'm actually mentoring somebody right now, and I'm like, when she gets her feet wet, I'm like, ask to be part of the meeting. Giuseppe Gallo talked about from Italicus how one of the ways he felt confident to launch his own brand is that when he realized that he had hit his peak of being a brand ambassador. For him, it was like the 4th or 5th year, and he knew he was going to want to do something else, and he started working in innovation and things of that nature. And he said, I started asking to sit in meetings, and I took so many notes. He's like, I just sat there and I took notes because I started learning how the commercial part of the business worked, and how the distributive part worked, and how, legal part worked for he's like, I learned so much. He's like, so I was actually getting a paid education to learn how to launch my own brand while working for somebody else.
That's so funny you mentioned that, because I completely agree with you. And one of the things that I think, if you're new coming into this business, it's a nice little tip is to never kind of say no. Maybe it feels overwhelming to present to Hilton's corporate about your brand. And you sit at this meeting and you're like, I do not belong here. They're presenting a marketing structure. We're talking about mandated cocktails and bottles across all the Hiltons. I'm like, I don't belong here. But if they're going to ask me to be there, I'm definitely going to be there, because you never know what being in that meeting can bring for the next step of your career, or a connection you make, or a new job opportunity. Even if you're happy in your role, it's always nice to be able to have those one-off connections. And even though they can seem like overwhelming situations to put yourself in, we do belong there because we're the expert, right? We're supposed
to be the expert. Exactly. And the thing is, they asked you, so they obviously had confidence in you more than you had in yourself. They wouldn't ask you if they didn't feel you should be in the meeting. And it's believing in that, oh, they did ask me, so they much have that faith. And that's imposter syndrome. We all deal with it. Like, am I prepared? Am I the right person in this meeting? I'll never forget one of the most nerve-wracking meetings. So Diageo just brought Ciroc, right? It just made, they'd already owned Ciroc, but they had made the deal with Diddy, right? So P. Diddy, and we go to the Sean Combs offices, and I now have to train P. Diddy on Ciroc, right? So I'm not nervous about P. Diddy at all, because I'm like, he doesn't know fuck all about the product. So I could say whatever I want and he's not going to call me out on it, right? So I'm like, he's just P. Diddy. Like, him and I, we just have to find a way to jive and get along, and like, you know, and he doesn't give a shit how it's really made. He just wants to know the key points and the romance of the story, right? And he was super cool. But the person I was nervous about was in that room was the CFO, the CMO, like all the senior executives. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, I'm more nervous about presenting to them. And you know what I realized? They don't know anything about products either. They're marketing people. They don't know anything.
I love that you said that,
to be in the room with Diddy.
You're
and they
totally
don't know.
right.
They're like,
they don't know either.
You can talk yeah, they don't know either. That's not their job to know. That's not why they're there. They didn't get hired because they know everything there is about distillation. Taylor's back. Yay! Woo! Taylor, we were just talking about being in the room. We were talking about some of the benefits of being part-time, which was the fact that you sometimes get pulled into, if you're in a smaller brand, you sometimes get brought into meetings and get exposed to new information that you might not have, like how distributor deals work, or like maybe you're pulled into important meetings where you're like, oh fuck, why am I here? Like Jenna was saying, like she was at, you know, in the Hilton, like corporate, and like presenting the brands. And I was telling a story about like having to present to P. Diddy, but I wasn't nervous about him because he doesn't know anything about the product. I was more nervous about the CMO and the CFOs that were all in the room. And then I was just saying, but they don't know anything either. Like, they're not there because they're experts on distillation. They're there because they're experts on business. So as long as you present the brand in a way that connects, like, to the audience you're with, they're like, great, this was Brenna. Thank you so much, Elaine. So Taylor, have you had experience like that, being in those places where you, you know, didn't think you should be, but you're like, fuck it?
Well, I mean, initially, and to go way back to the, you know, the first bit of the question, and in sort of the benefit of the part-time nature, but then that evolution of who made you nervous and what rooms and sort of who were you concerned about. For me, it was my colleagues in the cocktail world that I was most worried about out the gate.
Oh yeah.
You know, I came in and I'm, you know, helping Remy at the time launch Brooklady here, and, you know, knew what I thought was a load about gin. You know, and wanted to speak about the entire category, and, you know, really quickly realized that the folks that I was most concerned about were my peers, because, you know, they were the ones who were the wealth of information. So, you know, was never fortunate enough to be presenting anything to P. Diddy, but I don't think, you know, similarly though, I don't think I would have been as nervous there, because I would have walked into that room and been like, heck yes, I'm the product expert here. I'm the category expert. But when you're in a room full of category experts, which is what they had me doing early days, it was really intimidating.
That is nerve-wracking.
I think, you know, in hindsight, was probably a great way to start, because that is the most critical audience. So doing that in a part-time capacity and getting my feet wet in that way, I think was really great. Because in terms of starstruck, not too concerned, but you know, a room full of intelligent people who know their craft, you got to be on your toes.
No, you're right. That is probably the most intimidating audience. I was always ready. I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm going to get called on my shit. Like, I don't know. Like, I know a lot, but I might not know as much as all of them. And suddenly they're going to ask me a technical question, and I'm going to be like, she's a fake. She doesn't really know anything. I'm like, I know a lot of stuff. Back in the day, I was like, I know a lot, but like, yeah, I'm not saying I'm the like most ultimate, you know, expert on all things. And it is extremely nerve-wracking. The person that makes me nervous the most is Don Lee. Don Lee, do you know Don Lee? So Don Lee, oh, of course, you're in the CAP program. So Don Lee calls me on my shit all the time. So I'll be doing like a presentation, and I remember I was in Mexico for Tales on Tour, and I was presenting something, and I got it like a year wrong. And I said something like the 1800s, and it was supposed to be like the 1700s, which is a pretty big difference. And I just kind of like, you know, went through it, and he pulls me aside. He's like, but he gave me a good point. He's like, Lane, okay, so it was the 1800s, not the 1700s. And I was like, oh yeah, like shit. I totally got that, and I was like, it's fine. It's like, nobody's gonna like, it's not gonna ruin anybody. He's like, no, you're the expert. They're gonna repeat what you said. So if you get it wrong, then they're gonna get it wrong. And then it goes on. And I was like, that's a good point. I was like, I probably should take that a little more, because I was like, it's we were talking about tequila. I was like, it doesn't really matter. And then I was like, that's a good point. I was like, you're right. It does matter. That definitely does matter. And every time I see him coming in my room, I was like, oh fuck, I hope I don't get it wrong.
Well, that too. Or honestly, like sometimes I'll say something and I do wholeheartedly mean it. Like you said, it was like a slip of tongue. I'm not also a walking encyclopedia. We have to remind ourselves our own brand facts, So yes. Even though we're kind of a walking encyclopedia, but I have to remind myself there's a million dates that we all have to remember and know and all that. But it is true. I'll catch myself about to maybe say something, and then I'm like, you know what? I can't remember if that's actually true. I'm just gonna avoid saying that at all. Like, let's move on to the next topic.
Just skip over that.
Let's
point.
Just skip that one. Yeah.
Or I love the line, as best I understand it, or as best I recall. That's like that legal buffer of not speaking in absolutes, where it's like there's room for error here.
Yeah.
There is room for error. Yeah. No, that's really good. Yeah, as best as I understand it, from what I recall, like this is what I remember, because I have this bad habit. I talk with such conviction about certain things. So Philip actually called me and he's like, Elaine, you say things with such confidence. He's like, so everybody believes the things that are coming out of your mouth. And he's like, and I know they're full of shit. So stop. And it's nothing important. It's just like bullshit stuff that I'm like saying. I'm like, I know, but it's not really anything that matters. He's like, I know, but you say it like so like convincingly. I'm like, it's got me where I am today. I just say things and people are like, oh, it must be right. Elaine said it's right. So I was like, my bosses all seem to believe it. So it's like, that's what matters. Sure, we got that presentation done. It's all good. Still writing it. All right. So Taylor, did you have any to that point about being part-time? Like, did you have any like negatives about being part-time, or like things that you're like, wow, this is something that people should be aware of if they're taking part-time roles? Like there's a struggle to it, or was it all fabulous and great?
Well, yeah, pros and cons. I think the positives for me at the time were still that flexibility and freedom to then get back behind the cocktail bar and work with any brands I wanted to, and not feel tied to any portfolio, because if you go full time and you still try to dabble behind a bar, you need to be very mindful of that. For my experience, and this wasn't to knock anyone involved in my experience, but I wasn't, managing my own business. I wasn't running my own programs. I was just being slotted into a program. So there was none of the administrative side of things. I really didn't see much of the back end. I saw all the like, show up and have fun and talk about gin and get your buddies excited about it. And I was like, well, yeah, I can do this. So it was a bit of a false sense of reality right out of the gates, although, there was a lot of positive in that lack of responsibility if I'm looking to balance the two. So I think it's just being very aware that, a part-time capacity representing a brand versus the full-time and really representing yourself along with the brand and managing your business are two very, very different things, but it's a phenomenal foot into this world. It's also a great opportunity to understand, do these brands resonate with me? Or, yes, I love using them behind the bar, but is this the way I'm going to want to tell a story? Is this the story I want to tell? And are these people that I want to work with? Because for me, just as important as the brands, I think, are the people behind them and the way they want you to tell the stories. And so pros and cons, but I loved it. And, heck, I wouldn't change a thing. And, it's why I am where I am.
No, I think that's a good point about the people you're going to work with, because, as I've done these and I've gotten to speak with people from at least, oh my God, up to 19 companies by now and different brands, I'm like, wow, I want to work for that company. Like, I think about my experience was so different and their experience and how they're working with their company. And I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, that sounds like, because there's so many different experiences and how people manage you and how they operate. So it's just having the balls to move from where you are to go to another one and test something out. And a great way of doing it is going to speak to people who actually work there. Like, do you like this experience? Do you like working with these people? And ask for the truth. Feed them like just like, I need you to be honest, because sometimes people, it takes a lot for them to badmouth their company.
Yeah, I love that, because I agree with you, like, about surrounding yourself with like-minded people. I'm so fortunate. Like, it would be very hard for me to leave my role, because I love Dom Venegas and Rob Ferreira so much. We are like family. Yeah. So we joke constantly about like, what's going to happen if we have to break up the bands? Like, they're honestly like my brothers, and we've become so close throughout this journey that it makes our job way more fun, way easier, and to collaborate together is just like so fantastic, because we all bring something also different to the table, So.
Yeah. Which is great, because I didn't get that. I had a lot of, Taylor and I had very similar what he is now. Like, I had so much autonomy that I kind of operated in my own little bubble. So I didn't have a lot of collaboration with other brand ambassadors. I would try, because I realized at one point I didn't have any KPIs anymore. So I was making all these menu placements because people would come to the Diageo bar and I would just work with them. I didn't have to go to accounts. Accounts came to me at a certain point. So I would just have appointment after appointment. So I would start sending out my placements. I'd be like, who needs some placements? I'm like, here you go. Here's 10 bars. I got like, here's like, you want some Don Julio placements? I got 5 over here. I got 5 Tanqueray. That's the only way I bonded. I was like, I'm just going to share like the placements, because if somebody needed some, I was like, I already got these, and it doesn't matter for me, and I know it might help you out. But yeah, I'm very jealous of that, because and most whiskey companies, like I know for Diageo, the whiskey brand ambassadors really worked a lot together, and the tequila ones. I worked on the entire portfolio, and I was the only one, so I had this weird role. And as Taylor says, sometimes it can get a little. We talked about this yesterday. It can get a little bit lonely.
100%. I think that's one of the biggest challenges of this job is we're on the road a lot. Sometimes you're traveling a lot. It goes in waves, but like I think that's one of the challenges is you are so connected yet so disconnected. I mean, with your own personal life. Like, I hadn't been home for last year, right before all this happened in the world, for like 3 months. I missed my partner. I missed my dog. Those are things that we need physically as like humans and mentally. So.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That was going to be the next question. Let's talk about, like, as a brand ambassador, obviously there's some great positives, expense accounts, traveling. I miss my expense account so much. Traveling on somebody else's dime and getting, get to see all these new cities. But there's also a lot of, let's talk about some of the challenges that you've experienced and like some of the systems you might have put in place to handling them. I know, Jenna, we talked a little bit about scheduling. That was a big one. So talk a little bit more about that. Like, what's the challenge there?
I think there's a big challenge there, because you kind of, like you said, we were just coming off talking about sometimes you can feel like you're on your own island in this job. So you're kind of managing your own schedule and figuring out your own ways of working, because nobody's there to kind of tell you how to do that. You kind of just have to roll with the punches and figure it out on your own. That's the interesting part of this job, is all of the management of your own time. A little bit of work-life balance while you're on the road. I mean, I had to learn that I needed to not show up, or I needed to like have them schedule in my road trip time that I wanted to go to the gym in my hotel, because I needed that. And even though you maybe wanted to start our meetings at 9 a.m., I need 9 to 10 to kind of like have my coffee and reset myself for the day. And I probably visited all of my friends' bars the night before. So you need to like kind of own that schedule and that management of your time, and not let somebody else own it,
Yeah. I think that's great. Taylor.
Just to that point, like early on, and I'll never speak for anyone else, although I feel like I've seen this in others, and I certainly experienced it, that I was so enamored with this, career, and excited and passionate. And I was, traveling around and on other people's dimes and connecting with my friends, that there's that line of, hey, this doesn't feel like work. So it really quickly can consume all aspects of your life. And then, to Jenna's point of just taking that step back and really taking control of, effective and appropriate communication of you putting your time first and foremost. Because, if you schedule your time first and foremost, take care of yourself, you're going to be so much more effective and productive than anything else. And it was hard for me early on because I am still and always will be, a yes man, but it's saying yes, but, when can we do this, or where do we ship this to, rather than just yes, yes, yes all the time and look back 2 years later and realize you've been burning the wick at both ends and it's caught up with you, which I think really commonly happens. So, just really echo what Jenna's touching on, in that honestly, my priority now, and one of the, later questions of do you have any advice, is I put my own schedule first and foremost in terms of when I look at my calendar, I schedule my personal time. And then I build my work calendar around that, because if you don't, it creeps up on you, because we do have so much fun. We are traveling the world. We are talking about whiskey and, parties, but it's
no, it's a big one. Like I had to learn, yeah, same thing, like getting the schedule time. Like for me now in my life, like my Sunday's my planning day. So I plan my entire week. Like actually I plan my next 2 weeks. So I book in all my gym appointments, like my Pilates, like classes. I have them all booked in. So I look at my schedule and it's like, okay, I booked my classes in. So I know it's going to happen. I know I don't try to take any meetings before 10 a.m. because I like my morning. I get up every day I am a pretty early person. So I get up like 6:30 every day and I meditate and I do my affirmations and things of that nature. I've gotten all spiritual in my old age, but but they really help me. But I also have learned that like I do my best work, like whatever my most important project is, I work on from 7 to 10. No distractions, 7 to 10. I just work on that. I don't work on anything else. I don't look at my emails. I don't look at anything else. It's my time, and I'm able to bang out like so much work. And I also, on my Sunday, I schedule my week. So I look at like, okay, here's all my projects. I've learned this actually working for Anheuser-Busch. I will break them all down to tiny little pieces. And it's like, okay, so how much time do I have this week? What's already in the schedule? What pieces am I going to take care of this week? So it could be sometimes like literally like, I'm just going to answer that one email based on this project. And I'm going to write the title slides for the presentation. And that's it. If I do that over the course of the week, and I schedule that in for Wednesday between 10 and 11. So I really do schedule out my time, because I have learned, like, if my day is scheduled, I don't have to think about it. Like, I just go, oh, what's next on the schedule? Boom. And I just do the next thing. Oh, I have calls between, 1 and 2. Like, that's when I take all my bullshit calls or whatever it is. By the way, they say there's a great book called When, and it tells you when you should do things and when you shouldn't. And never take any good business calls, like serious ones, between 12 and 2. Most people will say no. They literally say like CFO, like if people present like their business statistics and they're like, and it could even be positive, like we're up on the year, people will still hear it as a negative and stocks drop. So they always present their like stocks and stuff like that before 11 because people have a more positive vibe. So I never have like serious business meetings. If I'm pitching to a client, I never do it between noon and 2. I think because your blood sugar is lower. I don't know. But yeah, just things
Maybe
you
at
learn
lunch
about life.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just something I've learned to do. It takes time. Like every Sunday I have to spend like 2 hours like mapping out my week, but then I find I'm able to get so much more done. And my days are like, I take all the thinking out of my day. It's like, this is just how my day is going to roll. And I scheduled in my free time. Like I'm meeting even my friends with drinks, I'm like, Friday night, I'm having drinks with my friends. Like I'll book that on Sunday as well. Like when I'm meeting my friends and when I'm talking to somebody.
That's amazing. You're inspiring me. I usually make my to-do list in the morning, but
yeah, it's anal, but I used to hate it, and then I learned it just made my day so much more productive. So yeah, it's 2 hours on Sunday you kill, like do before brunch, and get it done. But anyway, that's what I do, and I also have a great app called Todoist. I love it. It's a great app. It's a to-do list. I highly recommend it. You can move things around and schedule your day. It's fantastic. Anyway, so challenge. I went off on a tangent. So let's talk about challenges. So we're talking about scheduling is a challenge. Being alone is a challenge. We also talked about, Jenna, I know you had some, or Taylor, if you had something else that you wanted to add. Sorry, I realized I was...
I think to go, with so much of this, that helping our counterparts and colleagues really have an understanding of what it is that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and like transparency. And honestly, early on for me, it became over communicating then. And then people like, okay, we don't need to hear from you anymore. We know you're working 20 hours a day. But especially when some of these, ambassador roles or engagement roles are new to an organization, there's always a bit of a divide. And I don't mean to speak for everybody, but I think a bit of a divide between sales and the marketing folks, whether it's field marketing or, the creatives in the office. So for me, one of the challenges was just really helping the team to understand what it is that I'm doing on a daily basis, but also how I drive value and how I also provide value for them. So that was certainly a hurdle for me. But once I overcame it, once I, found that sweet spot of, clear lines of communication and open communication, then it was, just hitting the ground running.
How did you let them know? How did you let them know? Like,
so for me, just like you, I live and die by my calendar, and I will give anyone and everyone absolute transparency to my calendar, so much so that people were like, okay, heck, we get it. So, I think for me, just transparency and also just being as inclusive as possible, because whether it's the sales team or colleagues working on the marketing side of things, just like Jenna was mentioning earlier, I find the more people I collaborate with, even if they've got the exact same job title, they've got a different skill set. So, bring something different to a project I may already be working on that, I'm just making them aware of. And all of a sudden they've got this great idea that elevates it. Collaboration and communication for me have solved almost all problems, but have, I think, been paramount to my success in this world.
No, I think it's a great point. Do you also find that sometimes, I don't know if this is true for you too, but like if I start, when you're working in your own head, right, you have an idea, but then when you say it out loud to somebody else, like suddenly more ideas spark, or it reconfirms what you're talking about. Like the minute you have that conversation with your other teammates, you're like, oh, poof, you're like, holy crap. Like the thing I've been struggling with now has just come clear.
All the time.
Yeah, all the time. I just want to touch on that point that you said, Taylor, about there's a little disconnect, right, between some of the nuances of our business. I think that's also a challenge in this world for us as brand ambassadors is sometimes every once in a while, somebody new will come into a position within our company or something. And it's kind of unfortunate that sometimes we have to reprove all over again the purpose of our role and what we're doing in an organization that we already have worked for, maybe for many years. And there is a consistency there that like all of a sudden I'm having to prove again my worth, which is crazy to me that that happens fairly often in these jobs that we have. Is like, what is the purpose? But
like
the purpose is actually huge,
Marketing in general, right? Like return on marketing investment is a new term. Like, historically sales folks, it's like, okay, here are your dollars for advertising, which has become marketing. It's like, we just assume this is a wash, going back 30, 40 years. Like, put it into whatever you think you're putting it into, but we have no real tangible way of evaluating this. And I think for a lot of folks who, and we need the sales team, and there's so much sales in everything we do. But there are a lot of those, very traditional sales minds. There's still that, okay, how do I evaluate what it is that you're doing? And therefore,
there's no ROI.
Concept proof. Right.
There is no ROI for a brand ambassador. No, you know how many times in Diageo, the brand ambassadors were on the chopping block? Many times. All the time. Like the entire program would be sitting in somebody's office and like I'd be called into a meeting because I was probably one of the most senior, and having to have that conversation, like, why do you think that like I'm like, oh, so I have to sell it in for okay, like this is what we do and this is the value. And I almost feel like we need our own testimonial page. Like, here, like, let's just get testimonial from all the accounts we work with and why they love working with us. And this is why they carry the brand, because we're working with them. And this is the programs we have. And then get them from the sales reps. And like, we have to have a PowerPoint presentation. Like, here, every time that happens, just like, here you go, testimonials from all the people. This is so I don't have to have this conversation with you. Just read that and we'll be good. All right?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Because it sucks. It's stressful.
It's is so stressful to wake up every day not knowing if everything that you've worked so hard for is just going to be gone,
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. No, it really is. It's really that it definitely challenges. And one of the things actually, Jenna, you also talked about less today was like we're talking about being in a market and like making sure your schedule, you're working within a schedule, your time's being used productively. Like you said, they do a pretty good job at that. And I wanted to talk about you use a tool. The team uses a tool called LilyPad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about because Taylor, have you ever heard of this?
No, I'm not familiar
LilyPad?
with that. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an
So Jenna, could you tell us how
interesting.
it works?
Yeah, it's an interesting system. I mean, it's definitely laid out for targeted sales goals, but I think it does kind of help us showcase a little bit of what our ROI is,
Yeah.
because we're able to log like we went to this account and we sold in a cocktail menu placement, or I did specifically, or something, and I can log that, and it'll spit back data to us about like what I did with these accounts. Um, Again, it's not it doesn't at the end of the day say, for me specifically, since this happened, X, Y, Z amount of cases happened.
Oh,
But you
that would
could
be helpful.
cross-reference the data, like maybe. But it's just a great tracking system to kind of figure out where you've been. You can look at, there's a lot of times I'll go to another city, and for example, Charleston. Now it's been a year and a half since I've been to Charleston. I've forgotten where I went. So I can go back and look, and it'll tell me the data of like, at this time, this person was working there. This is the sales rep if you really need to know. These are the products that they carry, and I can update that data as well. So it's a really useful tool. Of course, all of those tools need tweaks for our business and our
Always.
world, always.
But you also said you
But
could
it is
look up
successful.
the sales reps use it, right? So they put the buyer's information and stuff like that, so you'll know
Yeah.
who the buyer is.
Yeah. So if I'm going in blind, I can look up the account ahead of time and say,
So great.
they're there, they've been there, and these are the people that they're interacting with. And, I always like to refer to the brand ambassadors as like the good cop, right? We're the fun part.
Mm-hmm.
We're not we're not there to put any pressure on anybody. We're just there to like be the good cop, and like we have the best opportunity to interact with people also organically. So it's just a really great little tool to be able to use. So you're not just totally going into these places without any sort of idea.
No, which I think is great because research is important. And I was telling Jenna yesterday, Taylor, that Xavier Harit from Grand Marnier, he has this great system that I am totally stealing. I started one for New York where he uses Google Maps. So in Google Maps, every time he goes to a city, he creates his own map. And then you can put the places you've been. So you can create a map, like here's Chicago. And then if I did it myself, it's like you go in, you X off, like you mark off the place you went. And then there's a notes. I didn't know this existed until I did my own. And then like you can X off the place you've been, and then you can write notes like, oh, I spoke to this buyer, I did all this. So when your trip is over, you can see your map of all the accounts you went to, all the people you spoke to. So it's like a great reference tool to like know like what you did. So you can have a great recap as well, right? So when you're there, you can exit off. But also like, that question would say, hey, I'm going to, Boston next week. Do you have any places to go? You can literally just send them your map. Like here are the places that, I've been, and these are the ones I recommend, because I always found that really annoying, but necessary.
Well, and it's so key, right? We were touching on this yesterday, and I was actually speaking to some colleagues that, we use CRM tools as well. We use Salesforce and a couple others, and really effectively, to have predominantly led by the sales team, what's happening in their account, but that we can go in there and communicate as well, or, catch up on what may already be happening in there. We're very fortunate here in Ontario that is all tied to data. And this is, for argument's sake, the largest control state in the world. The LCBO is the largest purser of liquor in the world. So to be able to see everything that's tied to
that's great.
Every account, and have intelligent conversations with the account as well, because, oftentimes you go into an account and they'll be like, oh, we sell 80 cases of this, and we're just crushing it. And you look up their numbers and you say, oh yeah, that's like so phenomenal. Actually, you're only looking at 8 cases in the last, rolling 13. But it's just to have,
you can call them on
it's not to call them out, but just have those phenomenal resources and use the tools. And then, as I say to folks quite often, especially when they're getting their feet wet in this world, that I think we get so focused on getting out there and creating the excitement and the energy that we forget to account for it. And without the accounting for it, the work really doesn't account for anything. So these little tools and the reporting always seems taxing at first. And it's like, hey, why you holding me back from getting out there and preaching the gospel of whatever whiskey or, whatever it is I'm supposed to be chatting about? And it's, without accounting for that, without intelligently sharing that internally, it's not really worth much.
No, it's not. So it's like the tree falls in a room, a tree falls in the woods, and if nobody heard it, did it really fall? Like, does it count? I think that's the expression of something. It is like that. It's like people need to know what you're doing. The worst thing you do is like your boss wondering what you're doing all the time. That could be some of the worst things that your boss. So I always say, get your reports in on time and get your expenses in on time. And for the most part, they'll leave you alone.
Totally.
Like you can just keep doing your job.
Totally. Be prepared for the admin because it's going to come with the job.
Oh yeah. So Taylor, I want to get, because you had an interesting transition. So you went from a sous chef to a bartender to a mixologist. Well, a bartender / mixologist, right? To a molecular mixologist, right? Because you do molecular as well. And if I don't get these all right in order, I apologize. And then you are a part-time brand ambassador for Botanist Gin and Bruichladdich, which I didn't spell correctly in your question, so I apologize for that. Couldn't figure out how to spell. I'm like, I have no idea how to spell that whiskey. To becoming brand ambassador for Jack Daniel's, right? So this is definitely, and I'm reading this because it is a massive transition. There's that word, transition or pivot. Roles in the worlds that you spend time in, right? So like going from the molecular and from Botanist Gin and Bruichladdich, which is definitely in a different types of accounts, different people that you're having conversations with, to transitioning to working full-time on Jack Daniel's, which was your first role, and then you went to Woodford Reserve, but your first role, which required you spending a lot of time with college kids. But you had such a great attitude about it, right? But I know it was challenging. So I just want you to talk a bit about that, because it's a very interesting career path, like of going from that world into the Jack Daniel's world.
When I hear someone else tell it, it sounds a little more sporadic than it's felt. And it was, because this whole time,
I mean, it was over years.
The last month has been busy. It felt like a natural progression all along, because I was still so connected to the same core industry and a lot of the same folks, that the transition from culinary into cocktails made a ton of sense. At first, as I was saying, when I started cocktail bartending, it was on my days off from the kitchen because I wanted to learn both sides of the business. In my early 20s, thought eventually I would own a restaurant or bar of my own, and only at that time knew the back of house. And I just wanted to know all angles of the business, and very quickly fell in love with cocktail bartending because it was so transferable from the culinary world. But as it may or may not be obvious, I love engaging with people. So rather than speaking,
it's a little obvious.
Rather than speaking to the same 4 people every day and preparing, the same dishes over and over and over again, which I did love, it was like a new passion or a new flame was lit, but still being able to apply the same skills in a certain way. And then that just really sort of, I think, flowed into that part-time advocacy and ambassadorship, as ambassadorship was really even becoming a thing here in Canada. And, we were a couple of years behind what was happening in, New York, Chicago, Portland, San Fran. That brands were just catching wind of the fact that, hey, if we get credible folks from the industry to speak to our brands, that's good for us. And that's really where the part-time ambassadorship started. And those brands really resonated with me at the time because I already had the silly mustache and wearing the waistcoats. And
love it.
I was really living in the cocktail world. So, looking at that portfolio at the time made a ton of sense. And then, we spoke about this yesterday, and one of the biggest questions Brown-Forman had for me when I was interviewing for the role were, hey, you just came from, a very high-end gin, like purely focused at high-end restaurants in the cocktail world, and now you're looking at Jack Daniel's Old No. 7. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And I was just excited about the opportunities, the challenges we're going to present. I really quickly realized that I was going to spend less time with my quote unquote friends, at least while working, in terms of in the cocktail world. But it was new, exciting challenges. And for me, because it was still tied to the same industry, and I was still engaging with folks, and it still felt like I was winning people over on a daily basis to something that I was genuinely proud of. I still, that thread always felt like it was there, even though, as you tell my story, it does feel very disconnected.
No, it speaks true. It speaks a lot about who you are as a person, like that you roll with the punches and you just accept challenges for what they are. And like, this is a new thing and this is an exciting adventure. And not everybody has that attitude. It might be a very big disconnect to going from very fancy cocktail bars to suddenly you're in dive bars shooting t-shirts out of a cannon.
Right. And I think
which also sounds fun to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it does.
So I should include that I came from like high-end cocktail bar, and then I quickly opened a spot that was like, we were called Home of the Brave. It was supposed to be like Americana in Toronto, like loud music, fun dive bar. I had 2 slushy machines, and sure enough, and this had nothing to do with the role, but one of them was a Jack and Coke, because like what at the time to us in Toronto was like more Americana in a dive bar than like, let's sell PBRs and Jello shots and Jack and Coke slushies. So I was still like putting this like cocktaily twist on it because I was putting bitters in my Jack and Coke slushies, and I haven't fun with the recipe, but so it was, I think about, approaching the challenges, still having fun with it, and always being able to put my own thumbprint on it in some way, shape, or form, while still staying within, that brand framework, and making sure that I was representing the brands in the right way, but also representing myself in the right way.
Which is great, because it really is not, not everybody could make that transition. And there was a good question I asked you, because some people, but that's a good call. It's like, really, is this really you? This is who you want to be? Like, I've always lived, it would be hard for me. It would be very like back in the day, and I'm talking like, 15 years ago, even then, but it would have been hard because I've always lived I like living in the luxury world. I like spending my time with Daniel Boulud and Bernadette, and it'd be very hard. And I love a good dive bar, but it couldn't be my world. I'd be faking it too hard. It's like I'd be really just, I'd just be really faking it too hard.
I noticed my bigger challenge. My bigger challenge was what I was doing with my expense accounts. On Woodford Reserve, I was eating at like, you could get a great salad every night. I was eating, sushi restaurants, whatever you want. Whereas Jack Daniel's, I realized like I'm regularly on the search for the best barbecue and or fried chicken. So the meal plan.
Hey, I love it though. That's hilarious. It is true. That is so valid.
Yeah, that is very, very well. Well, let's talk about that, because also, both of you have done something really well, and I think it's about, networking. So networking is such an essential tool to building your career. And it's not something that comes natural to everybody. Yes, obviously, if you're working in the bar industry, you get to know people and you're talking to them, but then it's building on those connections, right? And knowing how to take advantage. And I love something, I know, Jenna, you used your marketing. We talked about this, what you did during COVID. You used your marketing background and then your relationships with some of the senior executives to actually present some great ideas. And that takes a lot of confidence to be able to like, hey, I have something valid I want to talk to you about. And then Taylor, we're going to talk about how you utilize your network, and you have this philosophy about capitalizing on opportunities. So and that's how it kind of you got where you are. So Jenna, talk a little bit about like how that worked, like how using your network and how you presented these ideas to them during this really strenuous time.
Yeah, I think it's weird. I never really wanted to end up in marketing, even though that was like my educational background. And then I knew I didn't really want to do that. So I moved to Chicago to go to art school and be a graphic designer. That didn't work out either. I mean, it's a not a luxury business to be a graphic designer, and the money isn't that great. So, so for me, I was like, how do I meld that world into like what I'm doing now? When I was bartending, and the rise of the brand ambassador just so happened to me at a time when I moved to Chicago. So I ended up in this world on accident. But I've used those tools that I learned in my, formal education to kind of elevate what I'm doing now, which gives me an opportunity to talk, like you said, to maybe more higher up executive level people. And I think the pandemic and the virtual life gave us that opportunity as well. I never really interacted with people in HQ in New York at the office because I was a field employee. That was my job. But now we're all sitting there on these screens talking to each other. So we have the opportunity to present our ideas. And so using them like marketing, and I'm really good at creating PowerPoints because of my graphic design background. They look beautiful. Who doesn't want to look at something that's pretty? It makes
Taylor's
your
been learning a
idea,
lot about this. Taylor's been spending his time perfecting his PowerPoint
right?
skills. So
I mean,
there
it
you
makes
go.
a good idea stand out when it
Mm-hmm.
looks really nice on paper as well. So we have the opportunity to interact with those people and kind of get them to understand why, even though we weren't going to be visiting restaurants and bars because they weren't open, we still had that ability to connect with our people. And that isn't necessarily always about giving them free drinks. It was like, let's give them an opportunity to meet with us as a company and talk to them about what we can do to make this whole situation maybe a little brighter and a little better. So that those networking opportunities within my own company really helped. And it's interesting because we didn't really always have that option. And I think this, even though it was a tumultuous time for everybody, we also were able to grow our communication skills internally. And, you know, that
No,
to me was a good networking experience.
no, I think I always tell everybody, it's like when you start to work for a company, if you happen to be at headquarters, and this is really great, I was like, get to know your IT people, drop them off a bottle, get to know them. They are your best friends. Like when your computer fails or your phone breaks or whatever, like if you're the person who stops in, says hi, gets to know them, invites them out to events, your computer gets fixed first. For anybody else's, you get the new computer one. But I learned this right off the bat. I was like, me and IT were like this. They always like, anytime the new we got a new phone, I would be the first person on the list. Get to know your HR person. Get to know your HR person. Like, yeah,
they're going to
really,
take you to
really
the next
important.
level, you know?
They do.
And they're going to also present you with opportunities when they come up. Like, I don't know really what my next step is right now. I love what I do, so I'm kind of okay just being where I am. But also, you're always thinking about the next step. The HR person, if you can get them to communicate with you on a somewhat regular basis, there's an opportunity. Maybe you could create your own path or your own role within your own company, as long as it makes sense. And you're like, this idea that I have, I think I can make to come to fruition for myself. But you got to have those people on your side. I mean, it's very easy to do this job and not communicate internally with, you know, HQ. But I do think it's a benefit to anybody. It's a piece of advice I wish I would have listened to my first go around. I did a lot better at it the second go around, but Pernod is also gigantic. Like, you know, so is Diageo. So you do have those people that you can like speak to, but yeah.
Oh yeah, speaking, and also the last one I was going to say, get to know the senior executives' assistants. They are the gatekeepers to the senior people. So if you can make them look like rock stars, like I started learning like to, you know, talk to them and be like, so Dan Butling, like, you know, and I got to know him better. He was a CMO, but I was like, so his assistant, I would be like, so I know he needs to take his wife. She was like, Elaine, I was like, if you ever need restaurant reservations or recommendations, just hit me up. So like I would email and she'd be like, so her and I started talking all the time. She's like, Elaine, she's like, Dan's anniversary is coming up. Do you have any places you can, so I made her look like a star. So whenever I needed Dan's ear, she was like, scheduled me right in. She's like, come on. And it was really important because I helped her out. She's like, you know, and it was things I learned as I became more senior. I was like, oh, you know what? If you treat the receptionist, everybody that's a junior, because they are the gatekeepers of so many more senior people. Always be nice to everybody, but really become their acquaintance. And then the senior executives, they'd be like, hey, Elaine, I need, like, can you help me out with this or whatever it is? Like, you know, I started learning and getting on their like good list. And now a lot of them, you know, some of them are my current clients, which is great. And Taylor, I was gonna say, you had some great things because, you know, your career, you know, as we said, was very interesting, lots of different steps. But you said something to me yesterday, which is like, you like utilize your network and capitalize on opportunity. And that's helped like project your career. So I know starting with Tales on Tour, because I know you have a big thing, but I'm gonna start you like kind of there. It seems that's where it kind of went from there, kind of took off.
So yeah, to echo all of those points, first of all, take care of the gatekeepers. I mean, that takes me back to like the restaurant days of like, take care of the dishwasher, take care of the bussers, because they're the ones who are going to get you what you need.
Most important people.
I love that. for me, yeah, I was fortunate. I put my hand up. I asked for things because my mother's thing was always the worst anybody can ever do is say no. And how bad is that going to be? So when I got into the cocktailing world, I was fairly new into it. And honestly, it hardly really even heard of Tales of the Cocktail. But the first Tales on tour was coming to Vancouver. And I said, well, heck, I've just moved away from Vancouver. Would be great to go back and visit friends. Love the city, love, an excuse to get back there. So applied for the Tales on Tour CAP program, was fortunate to get in. And when I look at opportunities like that, where you have to realize that there were hundreds, if not thousands of other people who wanted that seat, then you owe it to yourself, but most importantly, I think all those other folks as well, to bring everything you've got and do your best. And I was fortunate with Tales on Tour to, bust my butt for 3 days, even though some of it was a little cloudy based on, what we were doing. But after 3-4 days of busting my butt, I was fortunate that between I think it was Don Lee at the time in Darragon, selected somebody out of the group to then come down to New Orleans and cap. And I was fortunate enough to get selected. And really that just sort of skyrocketed my career. And then carrying on down to Tales in New Orleans, it was, you're sort of stuck in the cap community when you're capping, because you're running around from event to event and again, running on who knows what. But you made some great connections and leveraged those connections. I met Jared Schubert my first year at Tales of Cocktail, and they were just in the process of bringing Camp Run Amok to life, which, most folks listening to this will probably have some sense of Camp Run Amok. And that, for me, hearing about this opportunity, we just didn't have these things up here in Canada. So as soon as I got home, I emailed Jared and I was like, hey, what you all are doing with Camp Run Amok sounds so exciting. It was only going to be 100 American bartenders. And I said, having a little Canadian flavor in there would probably be good for you. So, you should probably make it 101 and have a Canadian. He just, the response was just yes, get your butt down here. Whereas now, applying for Run Amok is, I'm sure, tens of thousands of people from all over the globe and a much more extensive process than me, shooting a text to Jared. But my thought was, hey, I've met this individual. They're doing something that resonates with me and I think will do me well. And I'll be able to meet tons of folks who are like-minded, but also learn things. What's the harm going to be if I shoot them a message and say, great to reconnect, would love to be involved in what you're doing? And shockingly enough, most of the time the answer is yes.
I know, and that's a big thing. You actually took the time to do it. So it's most people don't realize about taking that time to actually follow up, right? So you got that card, you met a lot of people. It's really important to then put that information in your phone and then send them that note. One of the things I've learned over the years, after Tales or whatever, it's I write little notes on the back of the card and I send emails to everybody. And at least friend them on social media, get them into your network, at least do that step, immediately friend them on Facebook and Instagram, and then send them a quick note, so great to meet you. If you can remember part of the conversation, hey, that was a great point you made, or hey, the Run Amok thing, because it takes you to the next place.
It does. I mean, you had a question here and it was around networking, sort of carried on from this. And, whether we had any advice, and I said the exact same thing. I wrote it down here in bold: follow up and follow through. Everybody wakes up in the morning with a handful of business cards in your pocket, but what are you doing with those? So, I would, then shoot those folks an email because, again, it's as fresh as it's going to be, especially if you're somewhere like Tales or wherever it may be where, maybe you met them over a few drinks at the bar. Maybe you were clear-minded as heck, but you met 50 folks. And if they're still standing out to you, shoot them an email and just say, hey, it's Taylor from Toronto working on whatever. Was so great connecting with you last night on this, and this. Can't wait to see you again. And what that has done for me, just in terms of opportunities, and then even being able to come back to a contact 2 years later, saying, oh, I'm glad I shot them that email because at least I've still got their email now in my inbox and there's that thread that I can pull on. It's huge. And it's, otherwise, what does a stack of business cards at the front of your door do for you?
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's the running joke of the industry is we must have met at Tales, but what are you doing with that information? And I there's also so many other people at Tales that aren't just bartenders. There's restaurant owners, there's distributor people, there's supplier people. So you never know who you're going to meet in those moments. And so, I love that.
Yeah. And one of the best piece of advice I got was, Michael Vachon, who's he's American but lives in London, and he said to me, he's like, I make a very specific list when I'm going to trade shows, and they will be coming back. You know who I'm going to meet, so I make sure that I at least meet those people, because it's like tales can get really crazy. You know, whether it's like going to see them when they're going to speak. You know, he's like, you know, I know I'm going to be out in a party. He's like, but if I have like 10 people that I'm going to meet, I make sure I reach out to them beforehand and be like, hey, and I meet them at a specific place. And usually it's someplace off the beaten track, like for coffee or whatever. He's like, but I make sure that they're like my list. He's like, because half the time you could spend an entire like week at sales and not see half the people that were actually there, right? Because it's so big, right? Happens all the time.
Right.
Well, and the number of folks who go down there with a group of friends and only spend time with that group of friends, or, you know, to draw a similar comparison, I always say to colleagues, if they're new to this or just coming into the organization, if we're having national sales meetings, go sit at a table with no one you know within the organization and learn about them, interact with them, and, you know, hopefully make them, you know, find the senior folks and rub shoulders with them at lunch if you can. Because what's the benefit in sitting, you know, other than catching up with pals, but you already know these folks, you already have these relationships. You can already go for a drink with these folks anytime you want, you know, learn something new, meet someone new, and find new opportunities.
Yeah.
No, it really is a great point. Like I think about Tales James Hall of Fame. One year I just sat down at a table. I knew one person. I knew Lisa Laird, and I didn't know anybody else on the table. And then I ended up having like all these new friends. I have like some are from Asia now, like my friend Holly Graham from Asia. Like I met the folks from Blackened Whiskey who became clients of mine. Like, you know, I just met all these, just sitting at this random table, and there were tables full of people I knew. And I was like, I'm going to do something new.
So good.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we've been speaking for a little bit, but we're getting towards the end, but we still have a lot of great questions to talk about. So let's see. Oh, one thing I want to talk about, Jenna. So now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, like how do you see, you know, I know you don't have all the answers of like what your focus, I know this is conversations you guys are having, but like, you know, will you be going back into live? You just said you're having a live event. Like, will you still continue some virtual? Like, what do you think the year is going to be like for you? The rest of the year is going to be like for you?
I think it's going to be absolutely insane. No, because I don't think that the digital side of our business is going to go away quickly. I think it's going to be a really interesting time to see those two things have to balance each other out. I don't think it's going to disappear. I think now that we have this platform, it's amazing. Look at the three of us. I mean, I didn't know Taylor before. Now we're going to leave here. We're friends. So I think it's great that we have that aspect. And who doesn't want to, you know, educate 100 people at once? And then, you know, even though it's disheartening to disconnect immediately, we were talking about it's hard to shut your computer down and then you're in silence, right? But then I can walk upstairs and go to bed, you know, so there's a positive there. But I also think there's a disconnect in virtual platforming. And I think going back to traveling is definitely starting again. It's going to happen. We're going to hopefully get back to some kind of business as usual, or I don't like to say back to normal, but back moving forward on how the world's going to operate. I think we'll go back to travel for sure. Because I think people do miss that sense of connection, community, and especially, you know, you got two whiskey people here. Who doesn't think that whiskey brings people together? You know, that's the whole point of it, is to open that bottle that maybe you got from your grandpa or is pretty expensive. I always say open everything. Don't save anything, and share it with people, because that is what this whole thing is about. And so I'm ready to move forward and kind of get back to those moments. I think in Pernod Ricard, internally we use this term conviviality. It's a French word, obviously, but I think it's a good word to sum up what our business world is like. It's about those connections and convivial moments, and I'm ready to do those again. So yeah, let's do it. Let's get back to traveling, but keep some of that little virtual stuff. And I've learned how to use
I was gonna say, because there's some states I don't need to go to, right? You're like, do I really need to go to that distributor meeting, like with the 4 people? Like, no, like I don't need to get on a plane, travel, like leave my family home. Like we could just do this over Zoom. Like, you know, like, the tiny little markets where there's like 6 people in the room, and and it's like, no, I know, like, this is just like, why can't we just, and we can send them tasting kits, right? Things like, and I know Taylor has some great stories about that. So Taylor, I mean, for you, what do you think? I mean, the market's going to be changing. You're still in lockdown, so
Yeah, I mean,
you portion.
we in general really leaned into the virtual world, but I really leaned into the virtual world right out of the gates. I mean, I was trying to stay fairly connected to decent news sources, and here in Ontario, it felt like this wasn't going away for quite a while when we first went into lockdown. So I immediately shifted my energy into the virtual world, and continued to build on that platform and program. And we're a few months behind probably, but there's a very bright light at the end of the tunnel, and we will get back to, travel and that human connection. And for me here, based in Ontario, my role not currently being national, previously it was national, but there's really only 4 major markets here in Canada, Toronto being by far the biggest, but Toronto to Vancouver is the same distance as New York to Seattle. So, it's huge distance to cover. And I love the travel aspect of it and connecting with all those communities. But again, I think this virtual world, it will now just improve our efficiencies, really. Well, yes, I can come to way northern Ontario, but I'm not going to physically come. We're going to set up a great tasting. I'll send you the kits. And honestly, it will probably mean more opportunities and more interaction in the future. And now just weaving that back into that being out in the world and the human connection, because heck, I know the 3 of us know it, and I'm sure really the majority of the world is figuring out that human connection is, almost as important to our overall health as food, oxygen, and water. So I can't wait. I look forward to it. But again, just to echo Jenna, it's going to be a new normal. It's going to be a weave of these great opportunities, but also, man, I can't wait to hug my pals and high five and open a bottle of whiskey and share it, and just see eye to eye and feel human energy. It's coming.
No, yeah, no, I definitely agree, and I do agree, and I'm glad to hear other people thinking too that like the virtual will stay for the convenience, that sometimes things just don't need us actually to be there in person, and think about how many consumers you can taste and everything else, and you could do 5 tasting events in a day, and where you could only do 1 if you were doing it in person, and you could still make that connection. They could still taste your liquid. So there is definitely some new things that have emerged in a good way. The QR code, right, Taylor?
And different consumers, I feel like, in a younger demographic of people that I didn't really reach with Glenlivet or like Chivas. I'm now talking to 25-year-olds because the virtual world is where we're living. And, we've done a really good job of pivoting, but like changing our ways of working to. Glenlivet has done a fantastic job of being much more inclusive as a brand to people that look like me, people that are younger. So it's now we're able to engage with them on these platforms that maybe we wouldn't have had that opportunity because they wouldn't be the person to show up. They wouldn't be the person to say, I'm going to go to this in-person whiskey tasting for 2 hours. That sounds like a great time. I'd rather go to the beach with my friends. Now we have this opportunity to reach these people and open up a whole category of spirits to them. So I think I love the fact that we're going to have this balance, like you said, woven together, Taylor, for the foreseeable future. I feel like.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a really, really great point. And so it's good to see some positive things out of the craziness we've been living in. All right, so I usually wrap up the show with talking about 2 major questions. So one is, what mistakes have you made that you would like to share with others so they don't repeat them? So whatever you feel comfortable. Taylor, I'll start with you.
We got to be careful here.
Yeah, I think we should start the time over. Give us another hour and let's go. Let's start from the beginning. I've made so many. To me, the real mistake is if you don't learn from a mistake you've made. But that sounds cliche, but like that's the point of mistakes. It's to learn something and carry on. And the biggest one for me, I touched on this earlier. I will always be, especially when I'm so passionate about something, a yes man. I will answer an email at 10 p.m. I will answer an email at 6 a.m. And it's not because work dominates my life. It's because, you know, I may have the capacity for it at that time. You know, I don't live in this rigid world necessarily, but I realized that I couldn't necessarily let that be too much of a slippery slope of just saying yes to everything and letting it bleed into the entirety of my life. So the biggest mistake I made early on was not managing my personal time before then allowing all things work to flood into my personal time. So in now managing my personal time, I never feel guilty about that 10 p.m. email because I may have some personal time at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon that now no one in my organization is ever going to question because they know I'm putting in way more than 40 hours a week. They may not be traditional, but because I'm balancing those things and really owning it and taking control of it, it's worked really well for me and been very effective. But just be really mindful of how you're letting work bleed into your home, into your life, and make sure that you're setting boundaries and putting yourself first and foremost.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also have a great point. It's okay to say no. It's okay. It's okay to say no, you know, to requests you get, because sometimes requests, people are just being lazy. There is somebody else that they get asked to do that job that's, you know, maybe lower down the totem pole than you. You know, one time I had that conversation with somebody. I was like, do you know how much they pay me? Like, do you know what my salary is? Because you're asking me to do the job of somebody that we normally pay $25 an hour to. And I shouldn't be doing that job. Does not require me to be doing this at this moment in time. Like, you pay me this salary, you could ask somebody who would gladly do this, and like, you're wasting my time. I'm like, you have to realize that. And they were like, yeah, that's a good point. I'm like, yes, so don't ask me. They were just being lazy. They were just being lazy because I was just the easy go-to. And I was like, I'm gonna deflect this to my boss and be like, no. Like, can we just move this to somebody else, because this is not my job. I know they're just being lazy and I'm just at the top of the list. So learning to say no.
Yeah, learning to say no is big. I would agree. You know, for me, I think as I look back on it, I think my biggest mistake was, or not biggest, but one of the mistakes that I've really learned from in these like past 5 years with Pernod specifically, and then, like you said, we worked for Remy Cointreau as a company as well, is I thought I was the most important person in the room a lot of times because I'm very vocal. That's why we have these jobs, right? We have bold, amazing, you know, very forward personalities. And I didn't really understand a lot of times what the corporate people didn't understand about, you know, how important we were to the bigger picture. But then I think that is a mistake. I had to learn to take a step back and understand that, like, we're a very large global company, and there is so much more to it than this aspect of what we do on a daily basis.
Okay.
So I think that's a really big, broad mistake. But I do think, yeah, I agree that sometimes we need to take a step back and look at ourselves as well, and look at business as the picture. The business is, at the end of the day, what pays my paycheck. So I think we can get wrapped up in this world that we live in, and sometimes that's a mistake. We need to take a step back and look at how that all goes. So, but yeah, I mean, we've all made fun mistakes too. We were joking yesterday. I mean, who's never missed a flight?
I can't hear you guys anymore because my
flight.
down off, but I could lip read Jenna. So yeah. That was fantastic. So because of that, Jenna, I look forward. I'm going to listen to what you said later on, and I'm sure it was fantastic. So I think you probably gave some great advice as well, because I usually end on what great advice you would give other brand ambassadors. Actually, Taylor, you know I can't hear you. I'm going to ask that question of you. What advice would you give a new brand ambassador?
I think, like, full circle, come into it with an open mind, check your ego, and, you know, in terms of the scheduling, make sure you're building your personal time. And, you know, people talk about work-life balance. Work is part of your life, but put the things that are important to you in that calendar and build work around it, and you will be that much more efficient, and, you know, whatever it is that you do. So that's it. Just put yourself first and foremost, but check your ego. And to Jenna's point, understand that there's a much bigger picture.
Yeah. I
And
like
Jenna?
Yeah, so I think be the asset that you are, right? They picked you out of the bunch. So my advice is always, we all get imposter syndrome. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but like respect your steps to get where you are, and you got this. Kind of like sometimes you got to remind yourself you got this. I mean, it's very intimidating to walk into a room of your peers and colleagues, like we said earlier, and it's all here. We just have to remember to talk about it, when the ideas come or whatever. And all the knowledge is here. So be confident in yourself. And then my last tiny little piece of advice is kind of funny. I have a little phrase that I like to say. Never be the first to bed. Never be the last to bed. Second to bed is just fine. Feel free to ghost if you're not the host, but don't forget to dine.
I love it.
That's my favorite little
Thank
phrase.
you, Eric, for tuning in as usual. And thank you, Jenna. I look forward to hearing that. Sounds great. It looked like it was fantastic. But I guess it's a good time to wrap up. So I just want to say thank you all who have tuned in, and Jenna and Taylor. It was really a pleasure to get to know the both of you. Thank you so much for being on the show. If anybody's missed it, the show stays on the Facebook page. So if you want to share it to your page, the entire recording's there. It will stay on for the next 2 weeks. And then it's also on YouTube under Celebrate the Brand Ambassador. So feel free to share it wherever you like. But it really has been a great pleasure. And I'm sorry it cut out at the end, but I'm glad you can hear me. And I look forward to hugging and seeing you both in person really soon.
Yeah, virtual hugs. Taylor, nice to meet you. This is fantastic.
So nice meeting you.
Oh,
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Elaine.
Bye, Eric. Thank you.
Bye, friends.
Bye, everybody.